day, and welcome to this lecture which addresses the question, would you agree with Edward Said that the enterprise of empire depends on the idea of having an empire? Here and throughout it is correct to adopt a thematic analysis. However, in doing so it is inevitable that the discussion will flip back and forth over a period. Thus here, or in any essay, it is crucial to keep the listener, reader anchored in time, with some dates either specific or general points such as mid-19th century or late 18th century, otherwise the listener, reader becomes lost. Moreover, I should first mention the origins of our principal video extracts to be used from the early 1900s. Found in the basement of a local shop in Blackburn, Lancashire, for 70 years, 800 rolls of nitrate film sat in sealed barrels. The British Film Institute painstakingly restored the negatives. Consequently, their film and television archive has now doubled. Although the included spoken narrative of Professor Victoria Tolman pertains more to the history of Michelin Kenyon, I have left it in as still being very informative, as I have with Dan Cruikshank's commentary on the BBC clips. The scenes chosen reflect the nationalist and imperial influences among ordinary people at the time leading up to the First World War. Researchers revealed that the enterprise of empire depends on the idea of having an empire, for without the ideology of empire within the cultural framework of Britain, the British Empire would not have secured such a large territorial expansion, nor lasted as long as it did. Therefore, we shall explore this ideology of empire, its dissemination into British culture, and how the resultant empire culture gave rise to the acquisition and maintenance of the British Empire. The seminal work here is, of course, Edward Said's Orientalism, which claimed British cultural production helped to engender a feeling of difference and superiority of West over East, of colonizers over colonized. Additionally, the works of Bernard Porter and John Mackenzie are as crucial to our understanding as Said and their overall pretensions given equal credence. It must first, therefore, be established what exactly defines culture for the purposes of this discourse. Remember, it is important here to select an academic definition and preferably not the dictionary version. Nevertheless, starting with a dictionary definition is fine, as long as you realise that often these are not literal terms, but concepts, and therefore contain a cluster of ideas that go beyond the literal. A simple example might be found in that my wife is from Edinburgh, and thus a southerner or lowlander, whereas I hail from Lancashire, but claim to be a northerner. These terms are being correctly used here as cultural notions and not geographic. Thus, a society's culture is the shared attitudes, values, and beliefs that give it its identity. Not just the intellectual and artistic cultural products that come out of that society. Culture in this sense might be best seen as an ideology, the ideas of a society that justify how it acts and legitimizes its power. Lawrence argues that ideologies of empire sustained imperial rule, not only by legitimizing and by justifying the empire, but also by providing technologies and methods through which imperialism could be advanced. Such an imperial ideology drove and sustained the British Empire nonetheless. That material infrastructure was also relevant is undeniable. This opposition legitimized imperialism over other territories, and peoples thought to require domination and civilizing. Imperial motifs educated people into believing a part of British identity was its difference from and superiority over other races. This distinction between races, this Britishness, justified its imperialism. If we examine some of the imperial ideology and intellectual thought that was disseminated in these motives, we can begin to understand the contemporary pre-justifications for British imperialism. At home and abroad, the age of reform built on compromise, or sops to the masses. The philosopher James Mill, the author of The History of India, contributed to the belief that the English were justified in reordering the societies that came under their rule. However, his son, the philosopher John Stuart Mill, was even more influential. He drew a distinction between the less civilized and developed societies that would benefit from the rule of superior nations, such as the British and incorporation within their empire. Mill also argued that British imperialism increased its power and prestige and spread civilization and happiness. However, Spencer's social Darwinism, an ideology that spread throughout the Western powers and found a powerful niche in the United States as manifest destiny, was popular in the 19th and early 20th centuries, with its pseudo-scientific notions of a hierarchy of races and the inevitability of the strong dominating the weak. It was used as justification for the imperialism of the culturally and biologically superior British. This can be strongly linked to racist theories of the superiority of the white race over the black, used by 18th century proponents such as Edward Long in Jamaica as a justification for slavery that was later supported in the 19th century by scientific racism such as Samuel Morton's craniometry. Along with the division of the world's societies into races, thoughts progressed on the merits of the British race. British nationalism and patriotism led to the belief that the British race was superior to all of us. It was the most powerful, wealthy, benevolent, and civilized. British humanitarianism justified acquisition of new lands, as Britain sought to improve the peoples of the world and abolish the slave trade. Now, this next clip from the BBC programme The World in Richmond, Kenya, reveals many stereotypes of various races in the empire and indicates a hierarchy of races on parade. Unfortunately, many of the black faces were white, and of the black-faced minstrel variety. During the clip, consider how many of these stereotypes still exist today. For instance, good at music and dancing, as Dan Cruikshank explains. It clearly reveals much concerning a naive racism that would be accepted as scientifically proven fact. So, let's watch the clip.
Next, around the corner, I came across this section of the march. The men are blacked up as both male and female gollywogs, doing a dance routine. This blacking up craze stemmed from American music hall traditions of so-called coons and nigger minstrels. But of course the British Empire was multiracial. Britain still ruled a quarter of the globe, and the British attitude to non-white races was one of superiority. Black people were seen as a more primitive race. The popular stereotypes portrayed them as natty, untrustworthy lady killers, or as bumbling, clownish idiots, good at music and dancing. Richard and Kenyon filmed such street processions all over the country. Fake African tribesmen in leopard skin tunics and black clowns in Accrington. Black men in kilts in Birkenhead. And a drainpipe band in Halifax. In all probability, people didn't think they were being racist when blacking up. For them, it was just innocent entertainment. Asians then were given more respect. Gandhi and Prince Ranji, the cricketer, studied in England. While these Indian sailors march alongside white servicemen in Liverpool on one of the most patriotic occasions of the year, Trafalgar Day. Ports like Bristol and Liverpool had always had a small black population since the slave trade. These three black men are coming off the commuter ferry on the Wirral. However, in most cities, black people were a tiny minority. This little black girl on the bottom seems only just to squeeze into the picture. This chap has clearly been asked by the showman in the top hat to join in the crowd. Mitchell and Kenyon might have been up to tricks. The black miner in this film has clean shirt sleeves. It looks like he hasn't been down the pit at all. To amuse the audience, the filmmakers may have placed a genuine black face, a fairground entertainer, amongst the blackened faces of the miners. The fairs are one of the few places where there are job opportunities for black people.
So, this is where internalism fits in. The British had a view of subject peoples as children who needed guidance, when in fact many of them had belonged to mature and developed civilizations before the British arrived with their superior firepower. These ideologies were embedded within the cultural framework of Britain, as imperialism was a significant part of its cultural life. Mackenzie proposed that the British culture was saturated with imperial themes in its art and literature, music and theatre, stories, adverts and entertainments, exhibitions and public ceremonies, as well as its education and its effective indoctrination had a clear impact on British identity. The intelligence and perception of ordinary working people is often underestimated. Many of these artisans and labourers, male or female, would nowadays have gone to university. Education is an important form of social control, as it sucks the intelligentsia out of the working class and, perhaps cynically, it effectively buys them off. I have often considered that the them and us psyche emanates from English culture. Eventually, the British Broadcasting Company, later corporation, became a leading advocate for promoting the idea of empire. And as Sean Nicholas quotes, the BBC, with its celebrated remit to inform, educate and entertain. The era of Lord Reith is infamous, and the BBC was created to be a bastion of the establishment. Furthermore, the education system of Britain promoted the importance of empire to the nation. Our Empire Story and other Edwardian schoolbooks presented educational knowledge with an imperial bias that contrasted virtuous British colonials against treacherous, superstitious natives. This popular children's history text presented the two sides of rule in contrasting ways, with a propaganda element in favour of the rulers. In the chapter The Mutiny, Delhi, the British were portrayed as calm and collected, while the Indians appeared irrational and treacherous. Such classification of us and them clearly defines superiority in the minds of the rulers, that indigenous populations were weaker and in fact needed and welcomed imperial rule. Public schools and elite universities of Britain inculcated an imperial mentality and an ethos of rulership, jingoism, and feeling of inherent superiority of the British race. It is illuminating now to show a clip from the course DVD of the exhibition. This part reveals much explicitly concerning the middle and upper classes, and implicitly of the ordinary people.
The Palace of Engineering, the largest concrete building in the world, was a showcase for all that was best in British technology.
The largest display of engineering ever to be gathered together, designed to show the world the achievements and enormous possibilities of these key industries. But
the most popular area of the exhibition was the fun fair. In 1924, Leslie MacDonald worked at the fun fair. He'd been employed as an inspector of amusements.
There were 50 or 60 main amusement devices in the amusement park. It was said they'd combed the earth to find the widest selection of sensations and novelties of all kinds. You became aware of the visits by the King and Queen by an upsurge of noise generally, and you would see a moving crowd of people, and they would naturally follow around.
Wembley's new populist brand of imperialism was sneered at by some. In Hampstead, some socialists even formed the Won't Go to Wembley Society. But the people did go, over half the population. 28 million tickets were sold, 4 times as many as at the great exhibition's heyday in 1851.
And train is backing up once more and once more down at Wembley. The exhibition's now on view, so wear your Sunday smile. For whether you're in Timbuktu or in the Fiji Isles, you've got to come along, you've got to come along to Wembley.
Bertie Wooster went to the exhibition and made for the rather jolly Planters Bar in the West Indies Pavilion. In the Magnet, Harry Wharton, Billy Bunter and his pals go to Wembley on a school outing.
Now for the Palace of Engineering, said Harry. We must see that, you chaps. Over here, my esteemed chums, remarked Hari Singh, is the pavilion of my own country. Shall we strollfully go there? Oh, I don't mind a little jaunt across India, said Bob Cherry. Afterwards, I suggest we take a run over to Canada and Australia. Then I don't think a little tramp through Burma, East Africa, South Africa, Malta and Ceylon would harm us.
It was a noble and idyllic concept. It was a great comfort to them. It was something standing for stability in a disturbed world. I think that sums it up. I felt it was like the moon and the sun. It was something integral which was there and would never change. That was the feeling.
And that feeling called on the inspiration of the empire's greatest sons. Kipling had named the streets, and Elgar wrote the music for the opening.
Popularity appears to be more a matter of entertainment in comparison to the numbers, possibly due to the publicity and transportation. But before we move on, let's now catch sight of the individuals from the Factory Gate films who may have been typical of many working folk.
Filmed for the Hollywood Wakes in Oldham in association with Captain Payne Cinematograph Company. This is very typical of the Factory Gate films filmed in the Lancashire heartland and the cotton factories. It would have been shown in July 1901 for use on the Fairground Bioscope shows. The children seen in front of the camera would have been child workers. The smaller ones are obviously taking their father's or their mother's lunch to work and can be seen holding the food and standing in front of the camera. All the workforce can be seen wearing clogs, and now we have one of the first stars of the Mitchell and Kenyon films responding with his impish grin to the camera. Unlike other films made by Lumiere and Edison, the operators actually encourage this kind of behaviour in front of the camera and show the vitality and physicality of the audience responding to being filmed. The operators are now organising some kind of procession in front of the camera. However, our two urchins in the middle frame refuse to respond.
The children, all dressed exactly like their parents, and clearly work was a family experience. They all appear jovial, but that might be a response to the filming. Lord Meade's aim was to ingrain a sense of unity for the Empire. Britain was desperate to retain its global status, but was inconveniently bankrupt by World War I. Indicative research has shown that from that point on, colonial governors were no longer powerful entrepreneurs, generals or admirals, and on one occasion a pirate, but colonial civil servants who had to defer all financial decisions to HM Treasury. Simply put, the game was up. The accountants had moved in, and World War II confirmed the obvious. Consequently, the imperial message had to permeate into the everyday lives of working people. The scout movement of Baden-Powell proved very effective at gaining support for the Empire among Britain's youth. Societies such as the Colonial Society and the Imperial Federation League aimed to inform on colonial affairs and promote imperial unity and the cause of empire, often through paternalist or nationalist terminology. Military-style organisations for boys had first appeared with the Boys' Brigade. Baden-Powell had been a member of the Boys' Brigade. The Church Lads were an Anglican youth organisation formed by Walter G. in 1891. Prevented from forming the Church of England section in the Secularist Brigade, he formed his own organisation. We do not have a clip of the Boy Scouts, however, this is an amusing one of the Morecambe lads on parade.
When Mitchell and Kenyon came to Morecambe, they were actually working in partnership with A.D. Thomas of Thomas Edison Picture Company, and these formed part of a very successful group of films which are shown at the Winter Gardens in Morecambe. The Church Lads Brigade at Drill was filmed in Morecambe and actually shown the same evening at the Winter Gardens. You see the parade of the Church Boys Brigade. You also see the crowd reacting to being filmed, because Thomas Edison advertises, "Watch it, Edison's operators are about. Come and see yourselves on the screen." So the responding of the camera is very much part of the publicity. The boys now are acting and doing their drill and their military exercises. The young boy in the front loses his place and then tries to maintain military discipline and doesn't actually succeed, as you see in the following scene. When they were advertised, the actual brochure proclaimed, "It's a happy idea that the management has hit upon to include in the collection a wonderful scene of the Morecambe Church Lads at Drill." Needless to say, these pictures are followed with intense interest, and if you happen to be on the front when the photograph was taken, you can see yourselves in the same attitude as when the machine was passing. The film was shown at the Winter Gardens Music Hall on July the 3rd, 1901. Edison's show continued for 2 successful months in Morecambe, and so popular were the Church Lads at Drill, this film was also shown in other venues throughout the north of England. Now we see the customary surge of the crowd wanting to see themselves on the screen.
Right, I suspect this did not have an overt effect on the imperial notions of young men, but nostalgia may have influenced them in later life. Politicians such as Joseph Chamberlain had earlier sought to educate the public on the benefits and values of empire to the nation. Chamberlain argued that British superiority compelled Britain to spread the benefits of civilization to other countries, and in 1884 Queen Victoria told Lord Derby to protect the poor natives and to advance civilization was, to her mind, the mission of Great Britain. This spread across all schools in whichever part of the country and was buttressed by Oxbridge. But we must not forget church activity, particularly in overseas education. However, this was often counterproductive due to impecunious funding, whereupon education was often left to the Jesuits or Baptists whose loyalties were not to the British system. Imperial exhibitions such as Prince Albert's Great Exhibition of 1851 and the Greater Britain Exhibition of 1899 were designed to entertain and educate the masses and celebrate Britain as an imperial nation. Racial differences were highlighted by the Times on the 9th of May 1899, and British superiority was defined in opposition to black Africans and other colonised races. Imperial battles were reenacted between the primitive, savage Africans and the technologically sophisticated, heroic British. Incidentally, savage can be a difficult word for the historian. While not strictly its meaning, it was often used by missionaries to denote a heathen or an unbeliever, rather than the usual connotations of vicious or cruel. Now, Frank Phillis, a circus manager, brought his military spectacle, Savage South Africa, to pander to any prevalent imperialist notions. He brought 100 Zulus, Matabele, Boers and English South Africans. Unfortunately, the Boer War broke out and they were all repatriated. Phillis replaced them with Liverpool dockers and Jamaican labourers. The climax of the show was Phillis blazing away with 2 revolvers in a circle of dead horses and heroes. The show brought audiences to their feet with excitement and ended with a rousing rendering of God Save the Queen from all present. But by the time of the British Empire exhibition, the benevolent function of the empire was stressed. African colonies were presented as primitive regions waiting to be developed, intended to boost unity, trade, knowledge and public support and pride in the empire. Lord Meath's letter proposing Empire Day and the British Empire Exhibition of 1926 can be construed as attempts to counter apathy and to foster that sense of pride and support for empire. The 1924-25 British Empire Exhibition attracted 28 million visitors when the British population was 42 million. Of course, as previously mentioned, it will be important here for you to consider the class complexity of visitors and thus their motives for going. The objective of Empire Day was to instill in school children a sense of pride in the empire. In schools, speeches would be received, pledges of allegiance made, and patriotic songs such as Rule Britannia and Land of Hope and Glory sung. Britannia rules the waves. Yes, by 1815 the British Navy was larger than all other fleets combined and had come to dominate the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. It is interesting to note that the impetus and indeed first Empire Day began in a colony, Canada, in Dundas, Ontario in 1898. Patriotic music also featured strongly in the music hall, another promoter of British imperialism, through performances of songs such as By Jingo in 1877. I'm inclined to think that the desired outcomes for elites and the masses were different. All the elites were required to develop an active interest in objectively running or supporting an empire. It was sufficient to foster apathy and indifference in the working class to prevent antipathy, revolutionary thoughts against empire. So let's go to the earlier part of the 20th century and view Lord Roberts' visit to Manchester in 1901, which shows the tumultuous welcome to purported heroes of war. It is worth considering the notion of celebrity as it existed in the earlier part of the 19th century. Therefore, ask yourself why the crowds are gathering. No doubt they have been given a day off work or a day off school. There is probably a small fair or market stalls. This is not to disparage the enthusiasm, but to begin to take a less subjective and more objective approach. Lord Roberts.
This was one of the great Boer War generals, including Buller and Baden-Powell, all of whom visited Manchester in 1901. Mitchell and Kenyon were at this point operating and developing a printing service for A.D. Thomas. By May 1901, A.D. Thomas had used Manchester as the centre of his operations for cinematographic activities. According to reports in the Sherman's newspapers, 3 other cameramen were filming this event. However, this is the only film that has survived. Thomas Edison actually advertised this as illustrating the world history from day by day, the finest animated pictures ever seen in Manchester, War in Manchester. Come and see yourselves on the screen as living history. And now we see, and we believe that it is the great Cecil Hepworth of Hepworth's Photo Company, who actually used.
The British public had an insatiable appetite for tales of military bravado. Imperial literature such as the children's Boy's Own Paper that ran from 1879 to 1967, and the historical novels of G.A. Henty, such as With Clive in India and With Kitchener in the Sudan, were hugely popular in Britain. Newspapers reached a mass audience in the late 19th century as they became affordable for the lower, middle and working classes. We may wish to consider this view of the might of the Royal Navy, which was central to Britain's marine supremacy. On this clip there is no soundtrack here as I have speeded up the film to show all the vessels, as it does drag on a bit. So your eyes don't deceive you. The ships can't move that fast up the Manchester Ship Canal. Here's the clip. The display was designed to instill pride in the armed forces. It does remind me of those later Soviet displays in Red Square every May Day, much maligned in the West. This popular press helped to create a British public opinion that often was of an imperial nature, and Lord Northcliffe promoted the cause of empire within his titles such as the Daily Mail, Daily Mirror and the Times. He also realised imperial and military content, and the creation of British heroes of the empire sold papers. In 1899 the Mail first sold over 1 million copies during the Boer War. William Thomas Stead, although on the political left, also believed the progress of the world depended on the conduct of the British Empire, views that can be detected in his Pall Mall Gazette. Bread and circuses. The idea of empire became much stronger among the working classes in the 20th century. There is evidence that British children's education had an imperial flavour. Not just history, geography would be empire-centred. Science would be shown as a benefit to and from the empire. There were many other forms of education, through annuals, comics, the covers of goods. Ideological education was everywhere, from jam jars to textbooks and parades. In terms of the popular press, it's problematic as to whether imperial material was supply or demand-led. Argument continues as to whether the working classes were simply apathetic in spite of propaganda, or that the propaganda rendered them acquiescent instead of militant. The ruling classes were not interested in making them imperialists, but in not letting them be anti-imperialists. There was very little resistance to empire by the citizens of the British metropole. Empire for most people was seen as worthy. People born into an empire, particularly citizens of the metropole, become part of the ideology of empire, and the terms and conditions of imperialism become accepted. Examples of the ideology of empire permeating society were seen in Edwardian school textbooks, particularly in imperial motifs and the celebration of Empire Day. Now, Said would argue that such opinions demonstrate the evils of imperialism. By World War II, Sir John Benjamin satirised a young society woman praying in Westminster Abbey. Keep our empire undismembered, guide our forces by thy hand. Gallant blacks from far Jamaica, Honduras and Togo land. Protect them, Lord, in all their rights, and even more, protect the whites. Anybody who did not appreciate Benjamin's sense of irony could always refresh themselves on the earlier Kipling's White Man's Burden, a text often used to justify rapacious behaviour, alongside Spencer's Social Darwinism. It is now necessary to look towards the peripheries to keep our internal examination in context. All these events would have been difficult to instigate without the compliance of the home front. The effect of the ideology of empire within the cultural framework of Britain contributed to the acquisition of new territories, even when the government of the time did not wish it. British imperialism was justified in Africa for the humanitarian reasons of abolition of the Arab slave trade and the opening up of the interior to trade and Christianity. This reasoning was promoted by David Livingstone and the press, and seized upon by imperialist politicians. Even contemporary advertising made use of imperial images to sell everyday products. A Pear's soap advertisement made use of the humanitarian aspect of empire by highlighting how legitimate trade could supplant slave trading in Africa. The Opium War against China in 1841 was portrayed by the Illustrated London News as a crusade to introduce the benefits of free trade to yet another benighted Oriental despotism. Sir Bartle Frere, High Commissioner of Southern Africa, instigated war with the Zulus independently of the British government in London. But this embarrassment of defeat at the Battle of Islam Dawa, 22nd of January 1879, and the damage to national honour and prestige led to the government's full prosecution of the war, as well as the championing of the heroic defence at Roxcliffe. Are these adventures born of the profit motive, or does warlike propaganda take on a life of its own? Gladstone was forced to intervene in Egypt in 1882 to quash the rebellion of the Egyptian colonel Ahmed Bey Arabi, as exaggerated reports reached London of rioting in Alexandria in which Christians were being massacred. The Earl of Cromer argued that the British had to occupy Egypt because the Egyptians were, ironically, incapable of running the country themselves. The British, of course, had another agenda to control the trade routes to the Indian subcontinent. The government faced pressure from the press and public when the Mahdi defeated an Egyptian army. The press campaign of W.T. Stead led to General Gordon being sent to evacuate Khartoum. The British press closely covered the resultant siege of Khartoum. The British press and public opinion forced Gladstone belatedly to send a relief force that arrived too late. The press and the Queen blamed Gordon's death on Gladstone's tardiness. The lionisation of General Gordon's death led to public opinion condemning the Gladstone government, and duly fell in June 1885. Was this press manipulation designed to bring down a government? Certainly, the reaction was jingoistic. Gordon was portrayed as a hero in the press and in subsequent imperialist literature, such as G.A. Henty's 1892, The Dash for Khartoum. Later reports of the brutality to captives by the Mahdists in Sudan led to public opinion, along with the pressure from Lord Cromer, resulting in a full invasion of the Sudan that culminated in the Battle of Omdurman in 1898 and the retaking of Khartoum. The government also acted in response to French ambitions and threatened British economic investment in Egypt. Yet for the readers of the Pall Mall Gazette, which took up the subject with gusto, the subjugation of the Sudan was a matter of revenge, pure and simple. There was a symbiotic relationship between the military and economics, with one promoting the other. In South Africa, the press and Chamberlain championed the civil rights of the Uitlanders against Boer injustices, appealing to the public's concerns about justice and morality. Hobson has argued the public were persuaded by the press the war was being fought for the cause of civilization against the backward Boers. The British public had been incensed after the Kaiser sent a telegram to the Boer President Kruger, congratulating him on his success against the British again, while Boer political intransigence was an affront to British pride and a challenge to its authority and power. The Boer War, largely Cecil Rhodes' imperial adventure to gain control of gold mining in the Transvaal, was turned by the press into a nationalistic escapade and fully supported by Victoria. It permeated the British metropole to such an extent that children collected cigarette cards of the Boer commanders. The British press especially closely followed the siege of Mafeking, led by Baden-Powell. He later embarked on a tour of the industrial north to promote such patriotic fervour. Mitchell and Kenyon filmed Baden-Powell, the hero of Mafeking, at the opening of a drill hall in Accrington. Look at the clip and address similar points to the Lord Roberts scene.
When Baden-Powell came to Accrington on the 11th of June 1904, Albert Wilkinson, in association with Mitchell and Kenyon, filmed the event to show that evening in the local hall. People now responding to the camera in the usual fashion employed by the commissioners, and now we see Baden-Powell with members of Accrington society posing for the camera. Baden-Powell was of course the hero of Mafeking and one of the great heroic characters of the Boer War. His arrival in Accrington was greeted by thousands of spectators, with a parade of the military police, the local police, and the St John's Ambulance leading the parade. The showman exhibitors often used the same band that you see in the pictures as live performance accompaniment when the films were shown that evening or the day later in the local venue. One of the most astonishing aspects about the collection is the rapidity in which the films were actually in commission process and then exhibited. In many instances, there's less than 4 hours between the actual filming of the event and the exhibiting. Often the showmen use this as part of their advertising ploy. For instance, they would film in the afternoon and then advertise in the evening, come and see yourselves on the curtain in the local hall. Now again we see the band. Again, that would have been used by Mitchell and Kenyon exhibitors, in this case Albert Wilkinson, to actually show as part of the performance. films were always shown at this particular time as part of a 2-hour performance in the local town hall, the local venue, or often, in this case, the music hall. These films were only commissioned for a purely local audience. The Baden-Powell films at this point would not have been part of a Boer War attraction, as by 1904 the Boer War was no longer a prominent feature of major cinematographic exhibitions, and was part of the stock role that Mitchell & Kenyon had in actually commissioning and turning around films within 24 hours, purely made for a local purpose. However, the size of the crowd, the length of the parade, shows the importance of such a notable personage to coming to Accrington at this time in 1904.
Baden-Powell was a key military figure of the Boer War and later celebrity in the marketing of imperial notions. Given that this event took place in 1904, the latter might be the case here. The spontaneous celebration of the British public when Mafeking was relieved is testament to public awareness of British imperialism. That establishment fortress, the Daily Mail, reported that women absolutely wept for joy and men threw their arms about each other's necks at the relief of Mafeking. Hobson argued that the press manipulated the animalism of the uneducated working class and the naivety of the middle class to create a jingoistic crowd that offered unthinking and enthusiastic support for the Boer War. Opposition to the war gained momentum when Emily Hobson revealed British brutality towards Boer civilians, decidedly un-British behaviour, prompting an imperial crisis of gigantic proportions. Perhaps this reveals the fragility of imperial propaganda. Interesting to note that the behaviour is marginalised as un-British, even though carried out by the British. These divisions in feelings about the Empire were more pronounced by 1942 as the mass observation publication entitled Report on the Feelings about the British Empire conveys. Here, ordinary citizens filled in diaries and questionnaires, and from this reports were compiled. Mass observation has some interesting comments from the working classes. It is interesting to note that at this point, trade unions and socialist ideas were becoming prevalent. They were beginning to relate this to their own perceived exploitation. Boer War reenactments were very popular on silent film, shown in the local theatres throughout the provinces, and Baden-Powell embarked on a tour of the industrial north to promote such patriotic fervour. Let's look at this inadvertently humorous attempt to glorify the Boer War. A sneaky Boer is the short tale of a British soldier on watch who falls asleep and is ambushed by Boers.
Before the discovery of the Mitchell & Kenyon collection, Mitchell & Kenyon were famous for their war reenactments. Filmed in the Yellow Hills in Blackburn, it was an attempt to capture real incidents and scenes from the Transvaal. These fake Boer War films were very popular with the home audience, often showing scenes of the gallant British soldiers or Tommies with aspects of the sneaky Boer in this particular instance. When Mitchell & Kenyon made these films, they were actually advertised and sold under their company Norden. However, the showman used to do particular tricks to make the films more interesting, i.e. planting people in the audience, dressing up the exhibitors and commissioners in Boer War uniform, and also then incorporating elements of showmanship. So, for example, scenes of gunfire in this film would have been accompanied on a live performance by people actually hearing gunfire. This was a common trick, and one local commentator complained that so Advanced was the gunfire smoke that you couldn't see the pictures on the screen.
Well, not quite the Hollywood Rambo reimagining of the Vietnam War, but the principle is the same. However, Porter did not believe the acquisition and maintenance of the British Empire depended on any large section of British society, so long as a minority of men were committed enough to actually ruling it. Porter claimed that empire only affected the middle and upper classes. I do not support the idea that the masses were educated to be fully behind the empire. However, I would say they were educated to negate hostility, and Porter's notion may be misplaced. The Mackenzie School-Porter School dichotomy is central to this discussion, though not exclusively. Porter's comments need to be put into context and chronology when compared with Mackenzie. Mackenzie argued that imperial motives pervaded all of British society in advertising, cinema, youth groups, recreation and education, and through militarism, monarchism, hero worship, the cult of personality and scientific racism. The point of this type of propaganda is that it is piecemeal and subliminal. The local hero returning home from the warfront was also a popular theme. In April 1902, Lieutenant Clive Wilson featured in this next scene shot in Hull. The overwhelming size of the crowd for these homecomings is testimony to the fevered local and national patriotism. Although, in the interest of balance, it might be that the family were sizable employers in Hull. No doubt they were all given time off and encouraged to attend. Lieutenant Clive Wilson.
When Lieutenant Clive Wilson returned to Tranby Croft in Hull, he was welcomed by all of the employees of his father's factory, and it appears a special day was given in order to celebrate the return of the war hero. He actually received a Distinguished Medal for what appears to be very little involvement in the Boer War. During his time in South Africa, he actually asked his mother to send him tinned partridges and a whole series of luxury items in order to make the war more bearable. Clive Wilson was the son of a very wealthy and prosperous family in Hull. Here we see the members of the family. When the film that evening was showing in Hull, the whole family were invited to a special showing of the event by Ralph Pringle, who had commissioned this film from Mitchell and Kenyon. Here we now see Clive Wilson coming in front of the camera, posing as if he's having his photograph taken and then walking up to the operator. Although the advertisements proclaimed, "See the world's news days by day," many of the films were staged to actually fit.
The upper and upper middle class men who had been to public school and attended one of the elite British universities such as Oxford or Cambridge dominated the Indian civil service and the colonial service. So thus, this indoctrination of imperial themes was self-perpetuating, an indication as to why it is difficult to stop even at present. Yet in a democracy such as the limited one of Britain in the 19th and 20th centuries, the general population's acquiescence at least was required. Here we are mindful of Rousseau, that force does not give a legitimate authority to rule. He states, the strongest is never strong enough to be master all the time, unless he transforms force into right and obedience into duty. Imperialists realised this before, and therefore promoted it, and this did indeed work, as has been demonstrated. It was far more important to sell the idea of empire to the ruling elites, who would then have to go off and objectively rule an empire. Empires existed for trade and the strategic well-being of the British ruling class, who generally preferred a system of informal empire rather than the expense of direct rule. Certainly, there was a mindset amongst substantial numbers of the elites of British society to rule and administer empire, nothing entirely disconnected from the elite interests. The value of British imports may have exceeded the value of exports. Britain earned millions of pounds from shipping, insurance and returns on invested money overseas. London became the world's banker, aided by maintaining the gold standard, and sterling was trusted worldwide. As an aside, by the turn of the 19th century, Germany, Japan and the US all had stronger economies than Britain, but this is a period when the possession of geography and the possession of land was more important to power than simple economics. Therefore, for empire to succeed, core and periphery populations needed to submit to rule through ideology and propaganda, especially when the periphery's population far exceeded that of the imperial power. However, the causes or origins of imperial conquest are diverse and interdependent. Along with these government-backed reasons, public opinion played a large part in forcing the government's hand. Public opinion created through the press and the dissemination of imperial ideologies. Through imperial motifs in British society, Edward Said was correct. The enterprise of empire depends on the idea of having an empire. So, thank you. However, this final clip concerning the reported testimony of a First World War veteran brings everything down to earth a little bit. It lends some clarity to the behaviour and expectations of those who fought and died, separated from the jingoistic propaganda of the state. So we'll just listen to these personal recollections.
In response to the call for volunteers, men from villages all over Lancashire and Yorkshire formed battalions that became known as the Pals.
Pals, friends, grew up together, went to Sunday school together. Very closely knit people. A lot of these lads would be 16, 18, been working in the mills and mines for, no doubt, 7 or 8 years. They'd be cotton spinners, miners, weavers, company sergeant major there with his walking stick, status symbol of the regiment, to be able to walk with a stick. They use them as a marker for counting how many paces, a pace stick actually, that's what they use for. They've got the bayonets fixed, which typifies that they're virtually freemen of the borough. My uncles, John, Joseph, they served in the 11th East Lancashire Regiment, thinking that one great adventure. One pal will say, I'm going to enlist tomorrow, and somebody will say, right, I'll come with you. And then somebody else would go with them, and they'd be perhaps 4 or 5 all join up on the same day. As in the case of these 2 uncles of mine, they just went, volunteered, and that was it. Not thinking about the mother or anything like that. When my father went, he just went with the same thoughts of going and with his friends going, but in his case, he tried to get in the Navy. And he walked it from a village called Crosherbooth to Accrington, over the moors. No buses, over the moors. And when he got there, he was an inch too small, so he had to walk back. So the following day, he went to Rottenstall and volunteered for the Royal Army Medical Corps.
This film is of a battalion from the East Lancashire Regiment called the Terrors on its way to a Royal Review in 1909. 6 years later, the Powell's regiments left Blackburn from the same station for the Great War. Rex Law describes how it would have felt for men like his uncles and father who had just joined up.
When my uncles went and my father went, they would be doing exactly the same as these soldiers are doing now. They'd be embarking for probably going to Liverpool to get the troop ships to go straight through over to France. There's a padre. Can you see him with the white collar? He stood against he's turned this way now. Can you see his white collar? The padre would go to give him some spiritual comfort, no doubt. A lot of these young men will never have been out of the valley, out of Rosendale or Blackburn or wherever they come from, and to go on a train. In fact, probably 50% would never have been on a train apart from going to Blackpool. But to go on a boat and go across water, well, I mean, it's another world, absolutely. As you can see now, they would have been waving like a holidaymakers going on holiday, but it just simply wasn't holiday at the end of the day. They'd be thinking it was an adventure, just one big game. They would be like these. And got a smile on the face of each one of them. Even there's one drinking out of a bottle there. And then probably think, oh, we're back. Uniforms on, a few medals, and all the girls will be looking for us and what have you. They will be exactly the same, happy-go-lucky, glad to get away from the toil and turmoil of the mills and the whatever they were doing in the small villages. No future at all for them. They probably thought, well, we've got a future here. We're going in the army, and we're going and coming back as heroes, basically. Possibly little thinking that they wouldn't be coming home, as in the case of Joseph and John. One died of wounds in hospital, the other one was killed, and he was never seen again. His body was never recovered. And my father came back unscathed. But I think basically he was mentally wounded. When they volunteered, I don't think it was for king and country, quite honestly. I don't think so. Not from what I was told, not by my father. It was a case of a big adventure. Oh, let's go, let's see what's outside these valleys. And I think a lot of it was that. I don't think it was anything other than that. I'm positive it wasn't.